I am very happy to be able to present to you Susan Story Speight. That's how she told me to pronounce it. Who is an inhabitant or lives on White Oak Mountain. And I remember going up White Oak Mountain many years ago when I first came here and admired that amazing view from the top of the mountain looking down. Well, she is going to embellish my memories with more things about that wonderful spot. And she will also have her book, and maybe some of you already have it, the stories of White Oak Mountain on the table there. They are for sale for $30, and we're looking forward to getting kind of a hint as to what's inside those covers. So here we go. I would like to present to you Susan Story Speight.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming. Before I get into the story, there are a few people here I want to thank, and one of them, and where is he? Mike McHugh. Where is he? Mike, there he is, back in the corner. Who would not be thrilled to have Mike McHugh's name on their book? Mike has encouraged me for all the years I stopped and started and stopped and started. He never gave up on me, and he wrote the foreword. I could not be more proud. Thank you, Mike. Noel. He's been a big help in many ways. And hopefully I'll have time to tell you about that as we go along. There's so much to tell. But thank you, Noel. Is there anybody else here that I wanted to thank? I wanted to thank Chris Bartol. He had to leave. And John Vining. If I pass out, John and Joy will give the talk because they've heard it so many times. John and the Polk County Museum have been so supportive. And one of the funnest things I've done is give John a tour of the mountain. Even though he grew up here, he didn't know where all these sites were. And we had a great day together. Welcome to Spring Mountain Park, the coming sanatorium and Switzerland of America. Have you heard that before? Our story begins in 1887, when we first knew that the Stearns family were in North Carolina. We know that from a newspaper article that had them mining plumbago, which is graphite, and mica. They were shipping it from Shelby in Cleveland County, North Carolina, to up north. And that's when we first know that they were here. And prior to coming here, they made their fortune in mining sandstone and making grinding wheels and building stones. They came, I cannot emphasize the humble beginnings that they came from. But by the time they got here, we know how successful they were because of where they lived. And here we have the star of the show who started it all, Mr. Frank McIntyre Stearns. And here they are with his family in front of their home on Euclid Avenue. And please make note of the car because we're going to talk about that later. On Euclid Avenue, neighbors such as John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie. I mean, it was the showplace and called the showplace of America. In the meantime, their half-brother, Aaron French, who later came here, he was living on Penn Avenue in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, neighbors with the Westinghouse. Aaron French made his fortune in steel, and he designed and I guess kind of invented this spring that was used in railroad cars. And if you Google him, there's a lot to read. He was the most famous of the brothers in the world, I think. One of the first things, click, Denny, one of the first things on, well, let me say this, and I'm old now and I can't keep up with things as well, so I'm going to read my notes, but can you imagine them? They're over in Shelby. They can see White Oak Mountain in the distance. What brought them over there? There was absolutely nothing in their background that would indicate that they wanted to build 3 hotels or 2 hotels. And yet they came. And the first thing on the agenda was building a house for Mrs. Stearns and Frank's family. That house that he built was called Ben Craig, and I'm pretty sure the name came from a mountain in Ireland because the brother, David, his wife was from Ireland. And I think that was a nod to her Irish roots. Till we did the book, I don't think anybody really knew what that meant. So you see in the corner what the house looked like originally, around 1900, and what it looks like today. It's been redone, and it is the most beautiful place I've ever seen. And it's for sale for only $800,000. It has about 2,100 square feet, and 4 acres go along with it. It is a stunning, stunning place to live. The second thing, again, on their agenda was the Log Cabin Inn. Let me look here. Let me look at my notes. This was an extremely popular destination. Can you imagine? We're talking 1900 to 1916. 1900 to 1916. One of the first visitors, well, not the first visitors, but she was so impressed with our mountain and the Log Cabin Inn that she wrote this very long, eloquent letter to the editor of the Polk County News about her experience on the mountain. And her name was Minnie McFeet. And when Mike and I first discovered Minnie, we thought that was a pseudonym, Minnie McFeet. But a little research showed that Minnie was an educator. And she was one of the first people to bring the Montessori method to South Carolina. She built a school at her alma mater, which was Winthrop, College, Winthrop. I'm not sure what they call it now. And of course, there's a building there now with her name on it. She was quite ahead of her time. Well, I just want to read a little tiny sentence or two from what Minnie wrote about her visit. This is what she wrote. Nature's royal highway, she's talking about the road, demonstrating that those who gain anything, even pure air and enchanting views, must climb to get there. Nature is your friend. She has many surprises for you, that you lose all fear and surrender unconditionally to her charms. I'm sure there are people in this room that don't relinquish all fear when they drive up White Oak Mountain. And remember, it was a dirt road, and they ran a horse and buggy. So, as we know, part of the adventure of coming up there was the experience of getting there. I'm going to surprise you with the, I forgot this. The other thing that she wrote about, and I have yet to find any other information about this, she says that Frank Stearns, when Frank Stearns got there was actually another log cabin inn there, and that he added on to it. And if you look closely where those different roof lines come, I think that's a possibility. These are who she might be having dinner with. Oh, before the dinner. Look at this. Go, you're fine. Come on. John Vining just found this picture for us. It's called the Greens, and it is the backyard of the Log Cabin Inn. And there are two people putting. It was a putting green, and they had, I guess, cups, and they had flags. And of course, the interesting thing about it to me is the background, because it helps us verify where the Log Cabin Inn actually was. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you about who she might be eating dinner with. Click, Penny. Let's see. There's Minnie McPhee down there in the corner. This is Pansy. She wrote under the name of Pansy. Her real name was Isabel, where is her name? Alden. She wrote Christian books for adults and children, and she was very popular in her time. Also sitting at the table might have been Mr. Buckland. Have any of you heard of arnica? Arnica, the salve? They invented it. It's still sold today. And they advertised it as the best salve in the world for cuts, bruises, sores, ulcers, fever sores, chapped hands, corns, skin eruptions, and positively cures piles. So you may want to go out and get some. No, I'm not ready for you to click. We didn't have time. I sprung this on him, so he's doing a great job. Go back again. Also now she claims to be from France, but I think she was actually living in New York when she came here. But Madame Cecile Talma, she was an opera singer, and she had a great career overseas. This Serling, the gentleman that worked for that company or owned that company in Indiana, Serling was the first breakfast product sold in the 19th century. So you can see that it was a cross-section of the United States that came to that mountain. Okay. This is the half-brother, Aaron French, who made his fortune in steel and springs in Pittsburgh. Aaron French came on board, and he helped build the Skyuka Hotel. And one of the things that's interesting about his visits there was that the president of Georgia Tech was a visitor at the Skyuka Hotel. And those two hit it off, and Aaron turned out to be one of the biggest donors for the textile school that Georgia Tech was trying to build at that time. And there still is a building there, the Aaron A.F. French Textile School. So again, his memory lives on. Okay. And what they built, look at that. I'm going to use the word finds a lot. Finds, my finds, things that were surprising. And this was a big surprise, because I read in the Raleigh paper that David Stearns, to build this $80,000 hotel, at the time it was $80,000, bought the plans from George Barber, a renowned architect from Knoxville, Tennessee. And George Barber is my great-grandfather. That was a big find. They advertised this. I love how they advertised it. Oh, then this one, just stay right there. Look at this. It gives you an idea of what the mountain actually looked like. And Chris Bartol, who played a huge role in the book, colorized this so we could see it better. They advertised it as the domain of health and grandeur. Higher than Asheville, grander than Asheville, healthier than Asheville. They advertised liberally. The hotel had 4 floors, 32 rooms, a post office, call bells, electricity, and a telephone. And even though this was the early 1900s, those guests were connected to the world. And if that wasn't enough to keep them busy, Aaron French, the half-brother, buys the Mimosa Inn. They go down off the mountain and they buy the Mimosa Inn. For 30 years, a member of the Stearns family ran that hotel and even rebuilt it when it burned in 1916. In typical Stearns fashion, they hired Bert Leonard to come down and lay out the first golf course in Polk County. It was called Mimosa Links. It was 9 holes, and it was located over there off of Skyuka Road, kind of near where the Jehovah's Witness church is. And I'm sure many of you know that Bert went on to design and help develop the Tryon Country Club. Some say that Bert brought golf to Polk County, but really and truly, it was the Stearns that brought golf to Polk County. And somehow, I think they were probably both up in some resort in New York, and Aaron French met Bert and brought him down to do just this. And of course, that was Alan Leonard's grandfather. Okay. And it's really important to know that the Stearns family did not just concern themselves with their hotel investments. Frank was the president of the Polk County Railroad Association. He served on the Roads Commission. He promoted tourism, as did all of his family members. Uncle Billy, as he was called, ran both the Skyuka Hotel and the Mimosa Inn. And he was the postmaster of Tryon. He was a county commissioner, and he was also a charter member of the Tryon, let me get the words right, the Hunt Club, Tryon Riding and Hunt Club. He was a founding member of that. John found an article just recently written in 1925 that was talking about all the improvements in Columbus. But the writer of that article wonders what would have happened if Frank Stearns had not died in 1911. And I certainly wonder about that too. And of course, here are the pictures, and I got that one from the Tryon Museum, Underley and Christine. You see, you can't really see it, but it says on the road to the Log Cabin Inn. And this was the driver from Stredwick, am I saying that right? Stredwick Stables, getting ready to take Minnie McFeet and all those other folks up the mountain. And then, of course, you've seen this picture, I know, all the horse and buggies waiting at the depot because the train, as Mike told us in June, made all this possible. Okay. Now the car. Remember that car? Charlie, my husband, says I have to always show the car. Frank's son, Frank Ballou Stearns, came here with his father and family. He was on the school board. He contributed financially to the school. But what he really did was start building cars in his father's basement on Euclid Avenue. That car you saw at the first was one of the early cars. But what he ended up developing was the Stearns Knight. At the time, it was the fastest car in America. And there were a lot of reports in the Polk County News about his racing. He raced, and he had wrecks, and those were in the paper too, as well as advertisements for this luxury car, which is a huge collector's item now for aficionados. And if you go online, Google or eBay, there are a million things on there. You can buy hood ornaments, brochures, cylinders. I mean, it's all on eBay. So his name, and it was funny, this was kind of just a personal thing, but one of the people he raced against was Barney Oldfield. And does anybody know that name? Thank you, gentlemen. Linda said she did too. My whole childhood, every time a car passed, my daddy would say, well, passed fast, my daddy would say, there goes Barney Oldfield. I never knew who that was until now. And here we have our Stearns family racing against Barney. When he retired, you can go on, Denny. When he retired, and I'm not going to say too much more about him because of time, but he went on to design and have commissioned a yacht. And he did it again his own way. He used a type of engine that hadn't been used before, and it was called the Ginger Dot, named after his daughters, Virginia and Dorothy. And I was able to contact Dorothy's daughter, who was Frank's great-granddaughter, and of course Frank Jr.'s grandfather, which was a blessing. And then he ended up doing organic farming. He was a pioneer in organic farming. Okay. Now these were finds. One of the most wonderful things that happened along this journey was connecting with Stearns' great nieces. And one of them, Lydia Hyman, lives in a high-rise in New York City. And during her sequester in that high-rise during the pandemic, she was inspired to go through the family albums. So now we have something we've never seen before here in Polk County, I don't think. And that is a picture of Helen Stearns, her cousin, Irving, who we will talk about later, and Mary Frances Carpenter, who came here to be the head librarian at the Lanier Library. Here's a picture of Helen when she's a little younger. And we think she's standing with Uncle Billy at the Mimosa Hotel. Oh, and that's her dog, Tyke. And they're a Chimney Rock. Helen, well, there's a lot of stories about Helen, so you'll have to read the book about her previous marriage, but she moved here permanently in 1923, and she had hired Richard Sharp Smith, one of the main architects for the Biltmore House, to design a cottage for her on the mountain. And we have the plans, a little small look at the plans in the book, but she didn't ever build that house. And what she did do was buy property in Tryon off of Wilderness Road and built a English cottage. Okay. And there it is. It's still there. People live in it. It has a gorgeous view of the Pacolet Valley. And the person that designed it was Harlan Perkins from Boston. And she named it Welwyn. And when I looked that up, it's a town or a little place in England. And she traveled constantly. So I'm thinking since she designed the English cottage that she named it after her experiences in England. 11 years after Helen got here, her lifelong partner, Mary Frances Carpenter, moved in with her as she became the head librarian at Lanier Library. And one of the most fun things to read about was the programs that they put on. Because Helen was very involved. She was a charter member of the Tryon Garden Club, and she'll be recognized as such on November 3rd at the celebration. She was a strong supporter of the library, and she helped Mary Frances a lot. And I thought one of the most fun things they did was an exhibit. They did this at the library, an exhibit for community people to bring their, their hobbies. their things, their collections. And so they had this big display at the Lanier Library, and guess what they displayed? Mary Frances displayed book plates, a book plate collection from famous authors. Wouldn't we love to see that? Helen displayed her interest in woodworking and the making of violins. And together they displayed their collection of batik hangings. And sadly, I couldn't find any of those things. But to say that she made a huge contribution to Polk County. And even in Columbus, they had a book club. It was very popular, called the Helen Stearns Book Club. And it was named for her because of all the financial support she gave to the library at the school, as did Frank Jr. And not yet. Bless his heart. Of course you know that I hope you know, that Frank's most important contribution was starting schools in Polk County, and he launched that school around 1898. He paid for the land. Of course, he probably already owned it at that point. And he paid the teachers, and he built the buildings. And I read an article where a town leader had said, "Frank, you're never going to get credit for building that school." And Frank said, "I'm not doing it to get credit. I'm doing it for the children." And I believe that he was. In his will, Frank Stearns had a trust that gave money for teachers each year for the next 10 years after his death, for the salaries of teachers. And something very important that I forgot is that when Frank got here, his grandiose plan, now he bought, I forgot to say this, he bought 3,000 acres on the mountaintop, and it went all the way down into Columbus. And he had a very stylized map that he used to promote his vision. And thanks to the generosity of the Polk County Museum, we have that map, original map, over here for you to look at if you'd like to. It's very, very impressive. Let's see, who's next?
Susan, what's that building? Is that building where the teachers slept, or is that the building in the picture?
I'm sorry?
The building in the picture, is that the actual?
Yes.
Is that the school, or is that where the teachers slept?
That may have been a dormitory. It says so in the book, but I can't remember.
Okay.
I know you all don't know anything about forgetting stuff, but... and then probably, of course, I love the Stearns family, but probably one of my favorite, Denny, my favorite characters is Fannie Ricks, Ricks Haven. How many of you have heard of Fannie or Ricks Haven? Well, Fannie was born into wealth in Charlotte. She was traveling with her family. They were in Switzerland, and somehow she met this handsome man, older in this picture, of course, the two on this side, Benjamin S. Ricks. And they got married in Switzerland. And they came back to Mississippi. We have a Mississippi native here. You too. They came back to Mississippi and moved into his plantation, which was right outside Yazoo City. Do you know Yazoo City, Dot? Yes, you do. And they lived there. He was very wealthy, and they lived there for about 25 years. Then they moved into the city and built a beautiful house. And Fannie became the belle of every ball. She loved to entertain. She loved to be entertained. And of course, as you can see, she dressed beautifully. I guess that was the style of the day. This is an older picture that came up later. It's not in the book, but they're in Europe, and that's Fannie and her husband later in their life together, and some friends. I don't know who the friends are. One of the most exciting finds was connecting with Fannie's cousin, George Bean, because George gave us pictures that I don't think anyone in Polk County has ever seen before. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of. Okay, Denny? Denny's reading the script instead of paying attention. Of course, nobody has ever seen this. This is what she built. She came, well, I left out the Washington part. Let's leave it right there. After General Ricks died, she gave $20,000 to Yazoo City to build a library. And it is, of course, the B.S. Ricks Memorial Library. It's still there. It's on the Historic Register. It's the oldest continually operating library in Mississippi. And she brought down, again, a famous architect. He didn't mean anything to me, but Alfred Zucker from New York City. The library is very elaborate and beautiful. And of course, there was a portrait of B.S. Ricks hanging in the library, and so they eventually, the board said, well, Fannie, we'd like to have your portrait too. This tells a story about Fannie. So she comes for her portrait, sitting, and she never was happy with the way she looked. And she's there, and she looks out the window, and there is someone walking down the street whose hairdo she liked better than hers. So she goes out and gets that lady, I'm sure she tipped her, and she came in as a hair stand-in for Fannie's portrait. Then, after he died, she moved to Washington, D.C. She again was the belle of the ball, and the newspaper tells us that her name is on the list of all these state dinners. She entertained. Cousin George told me that when the cousins came to visit, the children came to visit, she would have her helpmate, Lizzie Burkhart, spread her jewels on the card table so that the children could play with them. And she even got a headline in the Washington Times because she left a bag of $25,000 worth of jewels on the train, on a train. And luckily, the porter found it and they were returned. And of course, Fannie gave him a big tip. But she started going deaf, apparently severely deaf. And she hired a guide here in Polk County with her cousin, stay right there, and rode over these mountains all summer long to find the perfect property. And they found it on what they then called Tryon Mountain. And she bought up about 1,800 acres. And she built the most elaborate estate that you can imagine. You can see, you saw, let's go back to the house, go backwards. You see the beautiful house, craftsman style house. And George Bean gave us these pictures, okay? And the snow picture gives you an idea of what the estate really was like. Every modern convenience. Fannie, sadly, died after only 5 years on the mountain. And it's really hard to imagine that she accomplished as much as she did in such a short time. She had what the natives call, she was milk sick. And that apparently comes from the cows, which she had, eating snakeweed. And her companion, Lizzie Burkhart, if she didn't die that day, she died soon thereafter. I did want to tell you, too, this is the next owner of Ricks Haven, but I did want to tell you what she had up there. she had cattle, Angora goats, sheep, hogs, pigeons, chickens. And to feed the livestock, she grew corn, rye, oats, barley, vetch, and velvet beans, which I've learned are legumes. And she hired locals to climb up that mountain, and some of them that are still around in the Newman family. They cannot say enough about Fannie Ricks and what a wonderful and kind person she was. And one of the ways she helped the locals was if they found an arrowhead, she would give them $1. So a lot of people contributed to her arrowhead collection. The next person came about 20-some years later that bought Rixhaven. Has anybody ever heard of Marion and Beccadel? She owned that property for 24 years up on Tryon Mountain. And she too was married to a very wealthy man. Her husband, Perry Beccadel, was one of the first and most famous gold miners in Montana. And he was much older than Marion. And because of his health, they moved to, how do you say it, P-U-N-T-A, Punta Gorda, Florida. Punta Gorda, Florida, expecting a paradise. And what they found was just sand and heat. And so Marion took it upon herself to change all that. She traveled the world and brought plants back to Punta Gorda, Florida. And she became nationally known as a horticulturist. And they still talk about her. If you're going on a walking tour in that town in Florida, you'll hear about Marion. I got this beautiful picture of her from the Newman family. She was a young woman. But the other thing that was interesting about her was she was into spiritualism and taking pictures of ghosts. Now, I don't know if she ever connected with Fannie or not, but she could have. She was also a painter. And, you know, you can go online now and look at people's wills, which seems like a very voyeuristic thing to do, but she gave all these paintings, of which I'm sure there were plenty of the mountain, to the Sarasota Art Museum at Ringling Brothers, as they call it. I think they call it that now. And of course I contacted them and nobody had anything, and I was very disappointed. I forgot something else. Bring the ladle. I had a long and wonderful relationship with Fannie's cousin, George Bean. I never met him. It was all email and a few phone calls. But when the book was published, he sent me, as a gift, this ladle, this sterling silver ladle that belonged to Fannie. And it has her initials on the handle. What a great surprise that was. And he was happy we did this because nobody else was doing it. Let's see. All righty, let's go. The second oldest house on the mountain, still standing, is known as Slick Rock, or some of you may have heard it called the Dodge House. It's Janet Dodge Howell. She's a PA for Dr. Vire. It's her family that still owns that property. Uncle Otto, as he's called, Otto Tremont Barnard, I think is how they pronounce the last name. Very humble beginning, somehow got to Yale University, became a very wealthy financier in New York City. And one of his college classmates was the president, William Taft. So Otto worked on Taft's campaigns. He also himself ran for mayor of New York City. He didn't win. And I stuck this picture in because it gives us a little taste of who he ran around with. Here he is, dressed for the Egyptian fete, Tiffany, Louis Tiffany of the stained glass. Louis Tiffany. And Tiffany had these huge, like 500 people came to this party. And it was all over the newspapers, and anybody that was somebody came. And Uncle Otto was there, and this is him in his costume. Okay? Here's Slick Rock, still standing today. It was built, Otto came. Now see, why did Uncle Otto come to White Oak Mountain in the early, mid-1900s? Nobody knows, but this is what I think. I think he came because of his relationship with the Vanderbilts. And they were over in Asheville building the Biltmore House. He bought 2,400 acres and built this hunting lodge. And it has the most fabulous, fabulous view. As I said, it's still in the family. When Uncle Otto died, he split the land holdings with his 3 nieces, and he didn't marry, he didn't have any children. And one of those nieces, I know you've heard this name, Florence Adams. Florence Adams. Okay, Denny. And she built in 1938 this beautiful 10-room house on the edge of the mountain. Unfortunately, there really aren't any pictures, except this one. But I reached out to the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, and they had a CD, I guess, that had been taken off of a 16mm family home movie. And it captured some of the pictures of Grace here. And again, as far as I know, none of these pictures exist. And they let me pull out some photographs to use in the book. Okay. I am very proud of this picture, because Fannie was a next-door neighbor of the former First Lady, Grace Coolidge, in Northampton, Massachusetts. When Calvin Coolidge, well, before that, I wanted to say just a little bit about Grace, because I had so much fun learning about her. And one biographer wrote this, and it's so true. That Calvin Coolidge and Grace Coolidge were a very unlikely pair. The only thing they had in common was their basic sincerity and high principles. Grace was gregarious, where Calvin was glum. She loved a fun time. He took a dim view of social pleasures. She was impulsive. He was cautious. And they did share another thing, and that was their humor. Hers was open and friendly, and his was very dry and unexpected. And when they were in the White House, the Secret Service called her Sunshine. And they get this, ladies, she wasn't allowed to help plan any of the state dinners. She wasn't consulted on anything, but she was supposed to show up and be a gracious hostess, which I know that she did. And while they were in office, their beloved son, Calvin Jr., died. And this tells a lot about these two, because for 4 more years, they had to serve in the White House while they were deeply grieving the loss of their son. They moved back, when it was all over, they moved back to Northampton, and Calvin died in 1933. And this is what Grace said about that. I am just a lost soul. Nobody is going to believe how I miss being told what to do. My father always told me what to do, and then Calvin told me what to do. Enter Florence Adams. They were neighbors. Here was another totally unlikely pairing. Florence was a divorcee. She was a suffragette. She was a staunch, outspoken Democrat. In fact, Grace described her, Florrie was what everyone called her, Florrie, willing to do anything. And that very first Christmas, after Calvin died, Grace was at Slick Rock on top of our mountain. And she really let go. She bobbed her hair. It made the news. It did. She wore trousers. And she smoked occasionally in public. They had a wonderful time on our mountain. And I wish, have any of you been to the Narrows? If you have, I took John there.
Yeah, I have an unfair advantage.
It's a highlight. If you could see the road today, and then think what it was like in 1938, when those two ladies were driving up to the Narrows, it is unbelievable. Sometimes they rode the train. They had a car here, of course, and they had a caretaker, and sometimes the caretaker would pick them up, or sometimes they would drive the whole way. And as the biographer said, you know, Florrie at the wheel with Grace holding on for dear life. They read voraciously, they did crossword puzzles and cross-stitch, and they cooked outside and sometimes slept on the terrace. They had a beautiful, beautiful view. Some of the old boxwoods are still there. They burned down in I have it written down here somewhere, 1960, I think it was. And they hiked. They hiked and hiked and hiked all over that mountain. And I believe that our Polk County's own Howard Williams, who's now 92 or 93, is probably the last person to have seen Grace and Florrie on the mountain, because his parents were caretakers at the Skyuka Hotel. And so as Grace and Florrie hiked over to Rinkshaven, they would stop at the hotel for water. And Howard, 8 years old at the time, would run down to the spring and get a cup of water. And of course, he says, she was just a normal person. And the people in Tryon provided that. And Polk County, the people of Polk County provided that for her. And it just, I must say, personally, it just makes me feel good that our mountain provided such a balm, such a respite for this beautiful lady who had done so much for our country.
Can I make a comment?
Certainly, not too long.
For anyone that's interested, there is a Grace Coolidge autographed envelope that just came on eBay today.
Oh, really?
It's not cheap,
No.
but it is really cool, and it's got a Tryon postmark.
Oh,
It's
oh,
1935.
Well, she was a prolific writer. And the book has a picture of a letter that she wrote to Seth Vining, and some other things that you might be interested to see if you haven't seen them already. I want to circle back now to the Stearns family. I know that Tryon likes to claim F. Scott Fitzgerald. Well, Frank's nephew, Irving K. Stearns, made many visits to the Mimosa Inn to visit his uncles, because while he was growing up, his father, Theodore Charles Stearns, was traveling here and abroad as a fairly well-known composer and conductor. He also got married 5 times along the way. His young wife, a beautiful lady, Alta Shank Stearns, died early, very young. And Irving was just entirely too much of a distraction for the composer and his traveling and all those women. So he was shipped off to Bryson City, where his mother, sisters lived, the Shank family. His grandfather there was Jeremiah Shank, and he started a company in Bryson City called Carolina Turning Company, and of course Irving eventually became president of that. But Marie this is where our connection comes to Fitzgerald. It turns out she ran a successful secretarial service in Asheville. And one day she got a call from the Grove Park Inn saying that one of their occupants needed some secretarial help, a Mr. Fitzgerald. Well, she goes, and when she shows up at the door, it's the famous author. She wrote, and she told this to a biographer of Fitzgerald, that Scott, as she called him, didn't really have any secretarial work to be done. But he named her business manager. And she spent much of the 2 years that he was in this area with him at the Oak Hall, at the Grove Park Inn. I'm sure she had ice cream at Missildines. And she played an important role in his life when he was here in North Carolina. And by the way, they stayed in separate rooms. I just want to clear that up. And then finally, and this is, again, is personal, and I thank you for your indulgence for letting me tell it. And because there were so many connections from my great-grandfather building the hotel. I mean, they're just connections after connections to me. And one of the things that Irving did was he became friends. You can go now. That's Marie, the secretary. Now that's the last picture. People from the area getting in the horse and buggies and coming for a visit. That was 1907. Irving became friends with Horace Gephardt. How many of you know Horace Gephardt, who that is? Not many, a few. Well, Horace Gephardt wrote that book, Our Southern Highlanders, which is considered the most important book on Appalachia. He left his wife and 6 children and stayed in the mountains, the Smoky Mountains, for how many years? Many years. And when he came out of the mountains, he went to Bryson City, and that's where he and Irving connected. The funniest thing to me is that I have always had a love-hate relationship with Horace Gephardt because he gets most of the credit for the formation of the Smokies into a national park. Even Ken Burns, in his documentary, gave Horace Gephardt credit. Well, Ken Burns didn't tell the whole story. The Smoky Mountain National Park, like none other, was also formed by the locals. The children saved their pennies. And my grandfather and my uncle and their contemporaries were also a big part of the local effort to turn the Smokies into a national park. And they never get credit. But that was one of the last things I found out, and I'm going, I just can't believe that Horace Gephardt is in the Stearns story. Because it just, another one of those things that was very surprising. Let's see. I think, after, this is important too, after Gephardt died, it was Irving Stearns who gathered he died in an automobile accident, and they gathered all of his papers and the photographs that George Massa took when he was in the mountains with Gephardt, and it was Irving who made sure that they were all preserved. And most of them now are in the Pack Library in Asheville, and a lot of them are in Western Carolina. And he also did something important. He made sure that Gephardt's wife, who he had left, and the 6 children, got royalties from all of Gephardt's publications. The Stearns were a remarkable family. I got to meet, email, phone calls, with his great-granddaughter and 3 of his great-nieces. And what a gift. What a gift. This has been an incredible journey for me. Joy says I should never say that I'm not an author because I wrote 2 books, but it was kind of like an assignment. And I did it. And it has brought me untold joy that has not ended yet. The Stearns, just like those stones that they quarried in Berea, Ohio, served as the foundation of many of the communities that they lived in. There's someone that showed up a little bit late that I didn't get to thank, and that is the lovely, generous Marie King, the artist, Marie King. She gave a lot of her time to me and this endeavor, and ended up painting this beautiful rendition of what the Skyuka Hotel looked like in its heyday. And I think it's on the first page of chapter 3, and I think that's the most beautiful page in the book. So thank you. And Chris Roger, who knows what this is?
Can we turn on the lights?
Yes, lights, please.
One of my stepsons, don't tell John Gargiulo this, but my grandchildren, we live right near where the Skyuka Hotel was, and of course what's there now is the old dining hall from Camp Skyuka. And one of the grandsons went over there and dug around and came up with these 2 casters that were on Victorian tables. And of course they came from the Skyuka Hotel. And he also found this shard of china, which has got the Stearns name on it. So those were other fun finds. You could pass it around, and if you would leave it somewhere. The research never ends. John sends me new stuff every day. Thank you for coming. I hope you learned a little bit more than you knew about our wonderful mountain, and certainly invite you to come up. I do tours, free, and it's a joy to show it off.